History does not collapse with an explosion. It collapses quietly when a dominant power mistakes force for leverage and discovers, too late, that the world has learned how to move on. Let me be very precise with you. In early 2025, the United States did not lose a trade dispute. It triggered something far more dangerous: the first serious economic realignment of North America without the United States at its center. This was supposed to be the art of the deal, a show of strength, a reminder of who sets the rules. Instead, it became a case study in self-inflicted isolation, where tariffs meant to intimidate ended up emancipating America's closest neighbors. If you believe economic power comes from shouting louder or taxing harder, this story will unsettle you. Because what followed was not retaliation, it was replacement. And once a system learns how to function without you, it rarely invites you back in. Stay with me. Because to understand how this happened, we must first understand the fragile architecture that once held this continent together. To see the scale of this mistake, you have to strip away the slogans and look at the machinery underneath. North America was never three separate economies competing with one another. It was a single production system designed over decades to function as one organism. Factories did not belong to nations. They belonged to processes. Parts moved north and south, not because of ideology, but because efficiency demanded it. Steel, aluminum, wiring harnesses, grain, energy, each found its place where cost, skill, and speed aligned. This system was built on one fragile assumption: predictability. Not friendship, not loyalty, predictability. When borders are reliable, businesses invest. When rules are stable, supply chains deepen. When trust exists, no one needs a backup plan. But the moment policy becomes theatrical, when tariffs are used not as instruments, but as threats, that assumption collapses. Firms stop optimizing for cost and start optimizing for survival. And survival always means one thing: alternatives. Before the first tariff was enforced, before the first factory slowed, the real damage had already begun. Confidence cracked. And once that happens, the system starts looking for a way out. In the next part, we need to trace where this system came from and why breaking it was so easy and so catastrophic. This continental system did not emerge by accident. It was engineered slowly, deliberately, through trade agreements that recognized a simple truth: proximity is power when trust exists. NAFTA and later the USMCA were not about lowering tariffs alone. They were about synchronizing time, aligning standards, allowing capital, components, and energy to move with minimal friction across borders that remained politically sovereign but economically porous. Over 30 years, this produced something rare in global economics: a deeply integrated regional platform. Cars assembled in Michigan depended on wiring from Mexico and aluminum from Canada. Food security flowed north and south. Energy pipelines stitched the continent together like arteries. Most importantly, the system internalized risk. Shocks in one country were absorbed by the whole. That was the quiet strength of North America. But integration creates dependency. And dependency, when misunderstood, breeds resentment. To a political mindset trained to see trade as winners and losers, interdependence looks like weakness. By 2025, the agreements still functioned, but the philosophy behind them had eroded. Economic law was treated as optional, history as negotiable. And so, when the first blunt instrument was raised, the structure that took decades to build discovered how quickly it could be broken. In the next part, we confront the first rupture the moment policy crossed into crisis. The first rupture did not arrive with a warning. It arrived disguised as resolve. In February 2025, the White House declared a national emergency, invoking fentanyl and migration as justification for a sweeping decision that stunned markets and allies alike. A blanket 25% tariff on all goods from Mexico and Canada. No carve-outs, no transition. No regard for the system it would tear through. This was performative toughness, not policy. The logic belonged to another century. Apply pain until submission follows. Siege economics. mercantilism reborn as spectacle. But here is the fatal error. North America is not a set of rival fortresses. It is an integrated production loop. A single automotive component can cross borders multiple times before it ever reaches a showroom floor. So when the tariffs hit in March, the damage was immediate. Factories in Ontario and central Mexico slowed, but so did factories in Michigan, Ohio, and Texas. The tax meant to punish foreigners landed squarely on domestic production. The administration expected panic abroad. Apologies, concessions, a rush to Washington. What they received instead was something far more dangerous: silence and coordination. If this is making sense to you, share it. Because the next move did not come from Washington. It came from its neighbors. And that move would change the geometry of the continent. What followed was not an emotional reaction. It was a structural one. Canada and Mexico understood something immediately. Retaliation was a trap. A tariff-for-tariff fight would bleed them slowly while Washington absorbed the pain politically and unevenly. Smaller economies lose wars of attrition, so they chose a different path. They stopped arguing with the United States and started redesigning the system around it. This is what many in Washington failed to grasp. Power in the modern economy does not come from blocking flows. It comes from redirecting them. The response took shape quietly through working groups, port authorities, logistics firms, and energy planners. A concept born not of ideology, but of necessity, decoupling as survival. The result was a new alignment built on 3 pillars: energy coordination, agricultural substitution, and most critically, logistics independence. A system that assumed the United States was no longer a reliable transit hub. For decades, Canada-Mexico trade ran through American arteries, highways, rail lines, border crossings. The U.S. was the gatekeeper. Now, that assumption was rewritten. When trust disappears, efficiency follows a new map. And once infrastructure begins to shift, politics becomes irrelevant. In the next part, you'll see how this redesign crystallized into a concrete agreement, one that turned America from the center of the continent into the space in between. The second crisis did not announce itself with headlines. It unfolded in spreadsheets, shipping schedules, and factory floors. The most vulnerable point was obvious: automobiles. The North American auto industry is the most integrated manufacturing platform on Earth. No vehicle is purely national. Every one is a choreography of parts moving back and forth across borders with surgical precision. The 25% tariff shattered that precision overnight. Costs surged. Delays multiplied. Plants built for just-in-time production found themselves choking on paperwork and penalty taxes. Detroit felt it first. Already strained by electrification and global competition, American manufacturers discovered that protection had not shielded them, it had trapped them. Cars became too expensive to build, too costly to sell, and too uncompetitive to export. Meanwhile, something remarkable was happening quietly to the north and south. Under their new bilateral framework, Canada and Mexico eliminated friction between themselves. Parts flowed freely, paperwork vanished, tariffs disappeared. A factory in Ontario could ship components to central Mexico without resistance. Its competitor in Michigan drowned in forms and fees. This was not a trade war victory. It was a rerouting of efficiency. By trying to wall itself off, the United States had accidentally built a free trade zone that encircled it, leaving American industry boxed in by its own policy. And once industry moves, politics always follows. Next, we must look beyond factories to people, communities, and the human cost hidden beneath these abstractions. Now, I want you to stop thinking like an economist and start thinking like a person who has to live inside this system. If you live near the border, this is not abstract. This is your job, your commute, your mortgage. The towns that thrived on connection, Detroit, Laredo, El Paso, Buffalo, were built on flow. Trucks moving, rail yards humming, customs offices stamping, manifests at speed. When trade slows, these places don't pivot, they wither. You were told tariffs would protect you, but a tariff is not paid by a foreign flag. It is paid by the importer, by the factory, by the worker whose shift is cut because inputs are suddenly unaffordable. When a plant closes, not because it lost to competition, but because it cannot buy parts sitting just across the border, something breaks not just economically, but morally. The promise was security. The result is uncertainty. And uncertainty is poison to families. If this story resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because these costs are being paid quietly while slogans stay loud. What's happening next goes even further, beyond people, beyond borders, into geopolitics. And once that line is crossed, it's very hard to come back. When economics shifts, geopolitics never stays still. Vacuum invites gravity. And in global affairs, that gravity has a name. By treating its closest allies as adversaries, Washington created a strategic absence, and absence never remains empty for long. While tariff schedules were being drafted in the White House, trade delegations were landing quietly in Mexico City and Vancouver. The Canada-Mexico partnership did not explicitly invite new powers in. It didn't have to. Capital goes where stability lives. And when one door closes, money looks for another. The United States once anchored the continent's alliances. Canada was a NATO cornerstone. Mexico was a demographic, economic, and security partner. Together, they formed a geopolitical moat no rival could penetrate. That moat is now cracking. By obsessing over bilateral trade balances, a crude metric that ignores systems, the administration sacrificed alliance logic. In doing so, it pushed its neighbors toward diversification, hedging, and strategic neutrality. This is the bitter irony. In trying to counter rivals through coercion, the United States adopted the very tactics it once condemned and achieved the opposite result. When allies stop seeing you as predictable, they stop seeing you as essential. And when that happens, influence doesn't vanish overnight, it erodes. Slowly, quietly, irreversibly. Next, we must face the hardest question of all, where this leads and what futures now lie ahead. From here, there are only 3 possible paths forward. None of them are easy. All of them are consequences. The first is the optimistic scenario. Tariffs are quietly unwound, not admitted as a mistake, but allowed to expire under technical revisions and political fatigue. The damage slows. Trust begins slowly to regrow. The United States is reintegrated, not as a commanding force, but as a humbled partner. This path is possible, but it requires patience, stability, and something rare in modern politics: restraint. The second path is stagnation, a cold peace. Trade continues, but partnership is dead. Supply chains harden around the Canada-Mexico corridor. New ports are dredged, new rail lines laid. Relationships mature without Washington in the room. Even if policy changes later, the system does not snap back. It simply learns to live without the United States. The third path is the darkest. Tariffs deepen. Exemptions vanish. Retaliation spreads beyond goods into standards, data, energy, and finance. North America fractures into competing blocs. The United States becomes not the center of gravity, but the risk to be managed. Here is the truth systems always reveal. The future is not decided by intentions. It is decided by incentives. And right now, the incentives are moving away from us. There is one final insight we must confront because it determines whether this story ends in decline or in correction. The greatest illusion of this tariff era is the belief that strength comes from control, from the idea that markets obey orders, that allies submit to pressure, and that complexity can be disciplined by decree. That illusion is now collapsing. Power in the 21st century is not about who can build the highest wall. It is about who others choose to build with. And choice is governed by trust. The Canada-Mexico alignment is not an act of betrayal. It is the market doing what markets always do, finding a way around an obstacle. Today, that obstacle is the United States. We were given an extraordinary gift by history: a continent of friendly neighbors, integrated economies, shared prosperity, and unmatched strategic depth. All we had to do was not flip the table. But we did. If you take one lesson from this, let it be this. Leverage without legitimacy destroys itself. Systems cannot be bullied. They can only be aligned. If this analysis helped you see the world more clearly, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Question easy answers dressed up as strength. Because the future of North America is still being written, and whether we remain part of that story depends on what we choose to learn next.